Hi everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today, I'm honoured to be speaking with Dr Sergio Lara-Bercial. Sergio, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Hi Dan, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Really excited to be talking with you today, Sergio. Why don't we get cracking? Why don't we get started by you introducing yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Sergio Lara-Bercial. As Dan said, I am a reader in sports coaching at Leeds Beckett University and the International Council for Coaching Excellence. That means that I do a lot of research into coaching. I do quite a bit of consultancy with governing bodies of sport and national bodies that want to improve coaching in their countries. But I'm also a coach of 25 years in basketball primarily, but also done a lot of work with multi-skills coaching with children. So I consider myself to be hopefully at that cross between an academic and a practitioner, really, and I always say that all the research that I do and that I read, I'm quite selfish. I do it because I think it's going to benefit my coaching. So that is more that way than the other way around. I'm a practice-based researcher as opposed to a researcher based in practice. I don't know if that even makes sense, but that's me basically.
It's funny you use that word selfish. At the moment, I've been having a debate with a few people on Twitter, and you should never get into. I think I've said this before in the Sports Psych Show. Never get into Twitter debates, but it's a friendly debate, and I've always said that to be the best coach you can be, it kind of has to start with you. The we starts with me in many respects, because to help players be the best that they can be, I think it starts with self skills. I think it starts with exploring, what you want, what you're trying to do, why you're doing what you're doing, why you're coaching. Because I think if you don't explore that area, I wonder if you can be the best that you can be and actually help your players to your optimal ability.
I agree, and we'll get into that in detail today through the work that we did with the serial winning coaches, really. But the idea of understanding who you are, understanding why you do things, your self-awareness, your self-control, your desire to improve, your own at times even pathologic need to win or to improve or to get better. That's paramount to these coaches, really. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, you mentioned serial winning coaches, and that's what we're going to talk about today. You, for the last half a dozen years or so, have co-led a research project called Serial Winning Coaches, where you and a colleague of yours, Cliff Mallet, who's based at University of Queensland, have tried to uncover the practices and the developmental pathways of incredibly successful coaches. So that's going to be our chat for the next hour or so, serial winning coaches, and to unpack the work and the models that you and Cliff have created. I think, why don't we start by talking us through the seeds of the research project, Sergio? How did it start? Where did this idea come from?
Well, as I was saying before, part of my job is with the International Council for Coaching Excellence. For those that don't know the ICCE, that's the familiar acronym really. This is like the United Nations of Coaching. It's a member-based not-for-profit, which brings together anyone that has an interest in developing coaching. Mostly we work at the national level, so we bring together the organizations in each country that deal with coach education and coaching. And all the way back to 2011, we created a number of working groups, and one of them was the innovation group. And in one of the meetings of this group, which brought together what we call the leading agencies, which was a small group of 10 countries, including the cream, UK, Australia, USA, South Africa, really Germany, the cream, France. One of the questions for them was, okay, we spend a lot of money in high performance sport, and the people that are looking after that investment, the coaches, we don't know too much about them, and we don't know how to recruit the best possible coaches. We don't know how to support them along the way. and we don't know why some of these coaches appear to be very successful, regardless of, because some of the coaches that we work with, they've been successful across different countries. They've been successful in the male game and in the female game. They've been successful across 30 years. So the group wanted to really pose the question, can we learn anything from these super coaches that will inform both the recruitment and the development of current and future coaches, so we can actually make sure that we're doing the best we can to guarantee that the investment we make is in the best possible hands. And that's where the idea to speak to these coaches came from. The idea actually came from New Zealand, was in the group as well. And there's a very interesting chap in New Zealand called Chris Bullen. Small chap, but energy to bucket loads of energy, really. And he just said, we're going to go right to the top. We're going to contact the top 15 coaches in the world, and we're going to talk to them. And everybody looked at themselves and were like, okay, Chris. And that's what we did, actually, but it came from the spirit of this chap that just wanted to go all the way to the top. And that's what happened, really. We were very fortunate because normally these people don't talk to researchers because basically they haven't got the time. These guys are 24/7, and that's one of the key findings, really, that they are 24/7. But because we were working through national agencies that in effect employ these coaches in many cases and know these coaches really well, we had a little bit of leverage for someone to say to this coach, come on, give us a few hours of your time for this project, really. And we were very fortunate in that sense. And that's how we ended up with the we had a short list of 31 coaches that met the criteria, because the criteria were very stringent. So they had to have won gold at a major event, so Olympics, World Championships, or in case of team sports, major leagues, so leagues that are recognized to be the best in the world. And to have done that repeatedly, at the beginning of the study, for example, to give you an example of someone that didn't qualify, was Guardiola. So Pep Guardiola, the football coach at that time, didn't qualify for the study because he won the Champions League twice, but only with the same team and during a 3-year period. So you could argue that that's not serial. It's just, it could be right time, right place. Okay. Guardiola would obviously qualify now if we did the study now. And I would love to have a chat with Guardiola. If you're listening, call me.
Of course, he listens into the Sports Psych show, Sergio. Of course, he does.
But that was the level of the coach, really. And from that list of 31 potential, in the end, we managed to get 17 of those.
Okay, so 17 coaches, and you were granted access to around about 23 of their athletes to have a conversation with them.
Yeah. So because, again, we have been a coach, really. We can be quite good at telling our own story and adulterate it and really make it sound really good. So we wanted to have a point of triangulation, really, where we would ask very similar questions of the athletes to see if the stories that the coaches were telling us were actually corroborated by the athletes, really. And I have to say, in the main, they were, which again was one of the other key findings, really, that these coaches were quite aware of what they did and how it came across to other people. Either that, or they were very good at brainwashing the athletes, which could also be a possibility.
You will be nice about me. You will tell everybody how wonderful I am.
Correct.
And I'm guessing you started this project. I mean, you've been a coach for around about 25 years, you say, so vastly experienced coach. And I'm sure you've been incredibly successful, but obviously you were put in a position where you're going to interview and study, talk about, research serial winning coaches. And did you and Claire for yourself have a little bit of a bias in terms of, before you started out, in terms of what you were going to find? Did you think, oh wow, these people are going to be really difficult, they're going to be tough, they're only going to be like that? Or were you pretty open-minded going into it?
No, I have to say I had very clear expectations. I always joke about I've watched every American sports movie there is. I've read every sports book there is. And I think I went into these interviews expecting these guys to be a cross between Count Dracula and the Wicked Witch of the West, and people that would do anything to win, without any care for the athletes or the methods, or just win at all cost. And I have to admit that that's what I was expecting, really. If I'm honest, I was wrong to go in like that. I was definitely wrong with the findings, really, because we found none of that, really. We saw some of those traits, but surrounded by so many other positive traits, that really balance things out, really, for these coaches. But yeah, I was going in there with that expectation.
Well, on that basis, let's begin with the end in mind. You came away from this study with a term. It's a term I love, and that's driven benevolence. And seeing driven benevolence along a continuum, actually. But we're going to unpack that for the rest of this episode. But define driven benevolence for me. What is that?
So the official definition is basically the relentless pursuit of excellence, balanced with a genuine desire to compassionately support athletes and oneself. Okay, so there's two halves to this definition. One is the driven side of things, and the other one is the benevolence, really. So if you want the drivenness is what I was expecting. That these guys are relentless in the pursuit of excellence, and in the standards they create for everybody around them and themselves, in the pathological desire to win, in the way they go about controlling everything they can control, and in the way that they are tough. They are not easy to live with, because they're extremely demanding. Okay, because one thing that I'm always very keen to emphasize is that when I talk about driven benevolence, I don't want to paint a soft picture of these coaches, because it's nothing's further from the truth. Okay, these guys are not easy to live with, but they are not. One of the terms that we also use is that they are ruthless, but they are not heartless. Okay, and that's where the benevolence is what's going to balance this drivenness, really. And the benevolence side is, well, I understand that I'm dealing with people, so I need to really make sure that I understand the people that I deal with. I need to look after them. I think in equal parts, because there is a sense of duty and care for the athlete, but also a sense of, people that are happy perform better. So also from a selfish point of view, I want to keep them happy because they're going to perform better. A benevolence towards oneself as well, because high performance sport is a very volatile and a stressful environment, and there are more, typically for everybody, for every coach, there are more downs than ups, and you need to be able to pull yourself together and be resilient and be kind to yourself, really, in the good times and the bad times, and the idea of being able to understand that no matter how bad your day is, you get another chance tomorrow. There's going to be another day tomorrow. So is that really balance of the absolute stubborn pursuit of being the best you can, with a genuine desire to look after people and to care.
It almost feels a contradiction, doesn't it? It almost feels it's like it's taking care of the me and the we. It's selfish and selfless. The capacity, the words I'm thinking about here, and they're words that frequently come up on the Sports Site show, is flexibility, adaptability. And that, I just wonder, is where not so much the complexity, but the complication of coaching comes in. Coaching is hard because you've got to be able to go up and down that continuum of I'm driven, I want this. But for me as a coach, I have to want this within the frame of reference of working with an athlete. And that athlete is a person, is a human being. So I actually, for that person to be able to achieve, to help that person to achieve, I also have to be able to express benevolence, express empathy, be compassionate with that person, and that almost feels like, that sweet spot is so challenging to get. And from your research, it looked to me and actually, before I start here, I will just tell everybody that research paper, it's the third of 3 research papers in this series, and it's entitled "The Practices and Developmental Pathways of Professional and Olympic Serial Winning Coaches," and it seems to me that this starts with a coach's philosophy. Would you say?
Correct, and I was really going to go there because you mentioned the idea of a sweet spot, okay, and I think there is a sweet spot in terms of the general picture. Okay, the general picture has to be balanced and on that sweet spot. But as you mentioned, the what seems to be, and this comes across really, really importantly in the interviews with the athletes. Really, the idea of the coach is never the same 2 days in a row, if you want. They move along that continuum because the art of coaching, or the really difficult thing to do, is to know what kind of coach you need to be for a particular athlete on that particular moment. And that's where, like I say, there is a general balance, a sweet spot, but then there's the fine tuning every day of, today I'm going to be more on the driven side with this guy. But then with this other guy, I'm going to be more on the benevolent side, or with the same guy, I'm going to start on the driven side, but I'm going to finish the day on the benevolent side. And it's that continuous moving along this continuum that seems to be really hard. But back to your point, what makes it easier is the anchor of the strong philosophy, the real understanding of what are the must and the must not. Okay, that these guys, despite the movement along this continuum and being a bit like, I call them being a chameleon, really, they can change their spots and their colors really, really quickly. They are anchored by a center point, which is their philosophy, which is basically, we identified three key things. They are very athlete centered, so they really have the needs and the wants of the athletes at heart, and they are very mindful not to do anything that goes against that. And again, bearing in mind that in high performance sport, that's not always possible. And to give you a quick example, in team sports, sometimes to benefit the team, a player has to miss out. Okay, and that might go against the player, but that can still be done in an athlete-centered way, where you are, where you actually are able to explain that decision to a player, which links to the second point. So the first point of the philosophy is the athlete center. The second point is what we call a very high moral stance, where the key word that came from the athletes in the interviews was trust. Okay, that they can trust the coach, that even when the decision goes against them, they can trust that the coach has made that decision in the best interest of whatever it is, the whole, the team, the club, the country, whatever it is. But that element of trust and that always thinking that the coach is acting for the right reasons, and so trust, respect, loyalty, those things are very important. And the third point, and this was really a big surprise for us, particularly for me as well as a high performance coach myself, really, the idea of the work-life balance. So that the philosophy has 3 keys: athlete-centered, high moral stance, and the work-life balance. But the work-life balance for me was a revelation. I'm not happy to say this, but I can say that I've burnt out twice as a coach. There's been 2 moments in my coaching life where I had to stop because it wasn't going anywhere, and it was detrimental to my personal life. It was detrimental to my family. It was detrimental to the athletes, particularly because I wasn't good, and these coaches were very aware of that, and not always in a natural way. So some of them had learned that lesson the hard way by breaking down or being burnt out themselves, but they had come to the conclusion that, in a way, the only way to win repeatedly is to stay in the game long enough. That's the main precondition, really. You need to be there, and they really, and they had to believe that both for themselves and for the athletes, there had to be, and we call it a relative work-life balance, because obviously, as you know, Dan, the reality of high performance sport is not a 9 to 5 job. Okay, so the balance that someone that works in a 9 to 5 job is different to the balance of. I mean, for example, one of the coaches, that was kind of a light bulb moment for us really, when one of the coaches said to us, "No, I think I've got a pretty good work-life balance. I'm normally away from home 200 days a year, but I still think I've got a pretty good work-life balance." And we were like, "Okay, can you explain that a little bit?" And he was saying things like, "Well, in terms of looking after myself, I make sure that I sleep well, that I eat well, that I do some exercise. I've got a bit of a hobby that allows me to switch off. When I'm very fortunate that, and this is important, okay, that my partner understands what I do for a living, but I'm also very keen that when I'm away from home, I'm away from home. But when I'm home, I listen to me. Literally, I put the mobile phone in the trash can, so I can be present and be fully there with my family when I. So it is all relative, but that it has to be there, and it's different for different people. Okay, so I guess that the main point is you have to find something that works for you, but you have to try to find it. You don't. For me, you have to be purposeful about it. You can't just let it come to you, because it's not going to come to you naturally. Because by nature, both in terms of the nature of the environment, high performance sport, and the nature of the coaches, because in the we did some personality profiling of them. They're obsessive. Okay, the conscientiousness and work ethic is through the roof. So unless they make a conscious effort to switch off, they won't. Okay, and to go back to Guardiola, for example, because obviously we couldn't talk to Guardiola, but we could read the books, okay, about Guardiola, and I've read them all. and one of the things that happened to him when he was at Barcelona is that after the third year, he had to take a year out, even though they were winning, even though the prospects for the future were good. Guardiola went out of football for a year because he was burnt out completely. And I think since then he's become more aware of that from what I read, that you have to, while being obsessive and that's a good quality that you need to be successful, that doesn't become pathological. It's a really fine line, and again, that's another thing really. The work of these people, the work at this level is all full of fine lines that you have to be very aware of, and be very aware when you are tipping over the wrong side of that line, but it's full of fine lines. I think there's no two ways about it really, in that sense. It's such a pressurized environment that fine lines are everywhere.
You said you did a personality test within the study, and you mentioned conscientiousness, which is a personality trait, and we could break conscientiousness down into two aspects: industriousness and orderliness. So in terms of industriousness, what I'm hearing you say is that these coaches are very industrious. They enjoy the fine detail, so there's an element of orderliness there. But it strikes me, listening to what you're saying, it strikes me that you found, if you take this particular coach that you spoke about there, well, I'm 200 days on the road, and you're thinking, whoa, that's not great work-life balance. But then he's actually detailed what he does in his life away from his coaching. He seems very conscientious in terms of his rest. I eat well, I sleep well. When I'm with my family, I'm with them, I'm present. So it feels like the secret sauce, if there is such a thing, is actually to take that element of conscientiousness, which is that industriousness, the will to do well, and actually direct it towards your towards rest, towards your life away from sport.
Yeah, and for me, one word that always comes to mind when thinking about these guys is they're very deliberate, and I'm going to explain that a little bit. So they don't waste time.
Yeah.
So they really spend time working out what's important and what's not. and therefore they are deliberate about not wasting time on the things that are not important,
Yeah.
and really making time for the things that matter, which might be rest. Okay, again, I don't want to paint a soft picture. Okay, they at particular times the balance is very poor. Okay, in the middle of competition, in the middle of the Olympics, these guys are sleeping an average of 4 hours a day. Okay, and they know that, but they also know that they can't do that every day. They can do that um, for 365 days.
No.
Okay, that's okay to do over a period of a couple of weeks or whatever it is, but that they have to then compensate with something else. But to me, that idea of really making an effort to understand what really matters, what makes a difference, and not waste time with, be really economical with everything else, that's fundamental.
It's really interesting, and I'm sorry to dwell on this, but I think this is an increasing hot potato in sport, especially at the professional level, but also at grassroots, where people have day jobs and families outside of their coaching, and the coaching is very important to them. And I think that society in general, we're so socialized into this notion of hard work, and at the elite level, at the elite professional level or the elite amateur level of sports and sports coaching, we're very socialized into work hard. We think we need to be at our laptops 15 hours a day, but let's again examine that notion of conscientiousness directed towards work and conscientiousness directed towards life, and as you said, deliberate, purposeful, intentional. We could spend an hour on our laptop, or we could really spend an hour at our laptop, and we can really work properly. And I do wonder sometimes, my experience has been with some coaches, is they'll spend that 15 hours on coaching, and you wonder how effective those 15 hours have been, and you wonder how effective they could be if they spent more, like 8 hours. The other point I want to make is, I recently wrote a post about a football soccer manager who has just come off the back of a very successful season, and he in an interview after this crucial game was almost in tears and was talking about the difficulties of management, because he's virtually a rookie manager. He's year 1, year 2 maximum. And he said, even if I win, I go home, I can't really be happy because we go again on Monday. He said, I'm struggling to, I'm slightly paraphrasing here, but struggling to be present with my family. And for me, I just felt, wow, this person's just going to burn out. This person is obviously really, really has a great deal of talent when it comes to coaching. He's going to potentially be an amazing coach, but he's just going to burn out unless, as you said, Guardiola, unless they find a way to channel their conscientiousness at work and at play.
And you're absolutely right. I keep going back to this idea that the only way, you have to find a way to stay in the game. Okay, whether you are a professional coach at high performance level, or whether you are a grassroots coach that just really loves coaching that Saturday morning team, you have to make it work for you, and that's where the idea of the relative balance comes in. But to be honest, all of us that are into coaching, there's something about us really in the sense of if we didn't like doing something like this, if we didn't have a desire to do things well, we wouldn't go into coaching, really, because
of course
you do something else. And I think it really is a case of giving yourself permission to switch off. I think that's a big issue, really. But first, realizing that you need to, because I think some people, as you were saying, sometimes they feel they are unbreakable until they break. And again, one of the coaches, really, the coach that broke down before realizing he had to do something about it, was like, I just never thought that could happen to me. And all of a sudden, it hit him, really, out of the blue, really, that he was completely spent, really. And so realizing that can happen to anybody, and that's why I don't mind saying it. I've burnt out, and I thought it wasn't going to happen to me. And then giving yourself permission to switch off, because, like you said, really, as well, it's not only the culture of you should be at your laptop 15 hours a day. Is personality-wise, really, and that's another thing that we did. We did a motivation questionnaire, and basically that was asking them, on any given day, what do you aim to do? What do you aim to achieve, really? And they have to complete some stems, right? Some statements, and they have a big drive to support others. They genuinely want to help others, right? So when you are that driven, both to succeed for yourself but also to help others, when do you switch off? Because when you switch off, you feel like you're letting everybody down. You're letting yourself down because you're not working hard enough, but you're also letting the athletes down because you're not working hard enough for them. And this sense of guilt at switching off. Whereas what we know, really, not only from my research, really, but there's tons of research now on coach stress, that when coaches are stressed out or burning out, their performance as a coach goes down, and in the end, the detriment is to the athlete. So the same way that we say better people make better athletes, better people make better coaches as well. And it's something that we shouldn't be ashamed of taking those breaks. And interestingly, there's always one piece of information that I like to throw in. The 17 coaches, out of the 17, 16 were married, long-term marriages with dependents, because I was expecting 17 lone wolves,
Yes.
divorcees, that's the only way to cope with the system when you're on your own, because the system is going to swallow your life. But no, these guys, families, children, married for 30 years. That, to me, that was really surprising. And I think that's really one of the reasons why they were able to survive in that environment as well, because they have that backup of a strong support network really around them.
Well, let's shift gears slightly and talk about that drive, that will to be the best and to help their athlete or athletes be the best. You found 5 traits that typically represent a no compromise attitude to coaching.
Yeah.
Take us through those 5 traits.
Let me take you back to, before we go to the 5 traits. I think it's important in terms of offering a bit of background, really. We found that these coaches, one of the reasons why they were very driven is because they have to make amends. There was a sense of atonement going on that really fueled this being driven, right? And we found that so the vast majority of them had been elite athletes themselves, okay, and only 2 of them had actually managed to win in their sport, to win big, to win a gold medal at the Olympics, okay. The others hadn't, and I think that was in their mind, okay. In addition to that, so out of the 17, 4 of them had to stop being an athlete because of a car accident. So it was an abrupt stop to their careers, and some others really. So there was that sense of injustice. So another one, for example, the time of his athletic career where he was really ready to win a gold medal, he couldn't go to the Olympics because of the boycott, the Moscow Olympics, because he was from a Western country, so they boycotted the Moscow Olympics in 1980. So he missed out on his big chance because of that. So he was annoyed about that, 50 years later, or 40 years later. So there was a sense of unfinished business that fueled that being so driven and determined to succeed. But to go back to the 5 elements, really, the first one we've talked about already is the idea of they had an unwavering high standards. Really, they just don't take anything but the best, and they really try to create a culture where you have to be on top form every day. And it's interestingly, because a couple of them mentioned it's not a good when you go into the environments, it's not about, you don't create a high performing culture by having posters on the wall and nice quotes from Muhammad Ali or anything like that. That's not what they do. we call it a lift culture, where there are behaviors that are expected really, and the behaviors make the culture. And I remember going into one of these environments to interview the coach, and as soon as I walked in there, thinking, "Ooh, okay, and I need to behave in a particular way here," because everybody seemed to be really behaving in a very specific way and to a very high standard. And how do they manage to build that those standards really and that culture? One of the main things is they lead by example. They're very conscious of that. They make no apologies for it really. They are, again, one thing that a lot of them said: first to arrive, last to leave. Okay, they're always leading by example. Always prepared. Over prepare if you need to, but you have to ooze that sense of I'm ready, and we've done everything we could to be ready for this. And that really rubs off on your support staff, on the athletes, and they're perfectionist, borderline pathological perfectionists really, where they want things done in a particular way. I think I mentioned to you off camera, if you want, that we're writing a book at the moment really, and about these coaches, and going back to the interviews again. It is really clear that this perfectionism is one of the key things really, that they don't take any less, and it is borderline because it can be. I mean, one of the coaches really, for example, and this is the same guy that spends 200 days traveling the world. Okay, so for those 200 days. This guy spends a lot of his budget on carrying, shipping around the world a container with their gym equipment, because he doesn't trust the gym equipment in the training centers they go to. Okay, and bear in mind, they don't go to they don't stay at the Premier Lodge or the Travel Inn or anything like that. They actually go to the National Olympic Training Center of some other place, and they bring in their own weights to that National Olympic Training Center, okay, because he's so methodical and he doesn't trust anybody else's equipment. So at that level, really, they just want to control everything they can control. And finally, really, in terms of the standards, they just have no time for blunders. They can accept mistakes, but if blunders out of lack of care of preparation, you're not going to last long in that environment, either as an assistant coach, support staff, or an athlete. If you're not prepared, they don't leave anything to chance, and they drill that into everybody else's head. Really, you have to be ready. You have to be constantly ready and prepare yourself.
I've got a question for you. I think this is fascinating, and some of the things you've spoken about as a sports psychologist leave me nodding my head and sort of saying, yeah, absolutely. And then other things leave me thinking, wow, how some of those behaviours could be to the detriment of performance. Allow me to explain myself. As you're speaking there, Sergio, I'm thinking about detail. These people, when you use the word perfectionism, it sounds like a great deal of perfectionism around detail, around training, preparation, coming back to that notion of conscientiousness, orderliness. It's an interesting landscape because so much of my work as a sports psychologist is helping an athlete in all sports compete. And when it comes to competing, often, not always, but often, perfectionism gets in the way. In the heat of battle, when that gun fires, yeah. If mistakes happen, they happen. You've got to get on with it. And I find it an interesting landscape. I wonder sometimes if these coaches who engage in perfectionism or some quasi form of perfectionism around preparation and training, that can spill out into problems with the athlete. I'm sure this isn't necessarily what you studied, but I just think it's an interesting dynamic there.
It is, and look, I mean, because this is something that it's related actually, for example, to also the way coaches in team sports set up their teams to play.
Yep.
Because and let me explain that, because it seems like a bit of a jump from one thing to
No,
another.
it's good.
Um, the idea of, in terms of the perfectionism and wanting things done in a particular way, I think what they try to do is to create a very solid structure and a base from which they can then improvise if they need to, or be adaptable if they need to. But the base is there, and the base is what provides the stability. And that goes for both the coaches and the athletes. I think that's where things are at, I think, because like you say, if you are inflexible or just too wedded to your way of doing things, then you're not going to be able to react to what happens in the, like you say, in battle, because it's very unpredictable. And I think that's what these guys are trying to do. They're trying to create a very solid structure that allows them to then be flexible from that, both in terms of the way they set up the environment, but also the way they actually set up the, like I said, particularly in team sports, their style of play. Okay. Now, having a discussion about this with my wife, my wife is not in sports, she's in the arts, okay? And she was saying to me, well, that's a bit like Picasso, okay? People look at Picasso's abstract paintings, really, and they think that doesn't make sense, that it's just throwing strokes there and putting, paint on the canvas willy-nilly. But what they don't know is that Picasso is a master of the traditional painting. That he could paint you and it would look like a picture, and that's what allows him to then improvise and do this other stuff. That he wouldn't be able to do that if he wasn't able to do this. So I think that's kind of for me where it is, that it is a structure to as a springboard for the flexibility and the innovation and the creativity. Having said that, I think that some of them would admit that at times the structure has got in the way and been detrimental. But the more I think about it, I think that's what's happening there. That is it's, if you want, they're providing the roots to grow and the wings to fly. But the roots are really important. If you don't provide the roots, it's hard to then allow people to then fly and be creative and go off script a little bit.
Yeah, it almost feels like that embedded structure is a platform for psychological safety, is a platform for flexibility, adaptability.
No, but that's again, going back to the idea of fine lines. It is a very fine line, because while that might be very clear to the coach, that you are creating a structure to then allow for the flexibility as a platform to do something else, the athletes may not see it that way. The athletes may only see the structure and not be brave enough to be creative or to do something else. And the work of the coach in helping them understand that that's what's happening here. That yes, I'm being very directive at times and things need to be done in a certain way. But when you're out there in the field, then you have to read it and go with what your mind and body is asking you to do, right? Within the structure of what we normally try to do. And one of the so this is a field hockey coach, very successful field hockey coach, and his athletes, his players were saying that they really struggled with that at the beginning, that the previous national team coach was super directive and really constraining them and very dictatorial. And this guy came in with a very strong structure, but asking them to take a lot of responsibility. And for the first year, I mean, this guy nearly got the sack, because the players couldn't understand him, couldn't get it. They just wanted to do as they're told. And this guy took him a year to get them to understand that all he was trying to do is build a platform, like you said, for them to jump from that platform and get the best out of themselves.
A lot of the stuff we're talking about reminds me of the work of Professor Jarrett, the relationship stuff, who I spoke to on episode 16, and she has 4 C's of coach-athlete relationships, and it probably comes under the co-orientation, both being on the coach and athlete being on the same page. And I think I spoke a little bit about this a few episodes ago. did some work at a European soccer club recently. I was when I sat down with the head coach manager, and was impressed when he said to me, the first thing I did when I arrived was interview all the staff and interview all the players and get a real feel for what was working, a real sort of appreciative inquiry of what was working within the organisation, so that he didn't go in too hard with his own philosophies, and it was more of a gentle approach. I think that's such a fascinating landscape. I do want to, before we move on to the benevolence side, just one more thing on the drive that really interested me was that you found that coaches have 2020 vision of what the future looks like, essentially, in terms of they'll look a year, 2, 3 years ahead, picture that, and then break it down from there. Be able to simplify complexity, essentially, to be able to map out that journey.
It is really, on one hand, they have a very clear, like things to be done, very good knack for understanding, like crystal balling the future, really. What we need to do to remain competitive. I think because we were fortunate that in the sample of coaches, we had both Olympic coaches and professional coaches. I think things change a little bit between them because it's a different context. In the main, the idea is that they're very, and again, this is deliberate. Back to we talked about being deliberate. Deliberately, they sit down to think, okay, where do we need to, or in the case of the Olympic coaches, one very, very, and I mean very, very successful Olympic coach, I interviewed him right after the 2012 Olympic Games. 2 weeks after, right? After winning a gold medal in London. And he told me, okay, we know that we've already worked out that on I think it was the 10th of July 2016 in Rio, we need to go 1.5 seconds faster than we went in London to have a chance to win. And that's going to be at 3 p.m. and all we do now is work backwards in terms of where are those 2.5 seconds going to come from? Is it going to come from different training of the athletes? Is it going to come from the equipment? Is it going to come from a combination of all these things? But that's the target. And now we work backwards, okay? And that's why 2020 vision, because it's at the same time looking into the future, but then always having to bring it back down to what do we do today? Okay, which is again very important. I felt myself sometimes that I sometimes was so concerned about the future that I wasn't really looking after the day to day, or the other way around. You get so bogged down by the day to day that then you just firefighting the whole time instead of really having a clear plan. And within that, what was really fascinating for me, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, is the idea of simplifying complexity. Because the picture is complex. I mean, the sport in itself is complex. Just to understand the sport, whatever sport, from very complex sports like team sports with lots of variables and 22 people moving around at the same time, to the more technical engine-driven sports like rowing or athletics. In itself, the picture is complex. Then the picture at the high performance level is 10 times more complex because you've got lots of different people involved, staff, support staff. And that capacity of these guys to always simplify that complexity, to understand what really matters, what's important, both from the point of view what's important to the performance, what's important in terms of relationship, what's important in terms of technology, for example. Very adamant, these guys, that coaches shouldn't let technology override the system, that as a head coach you need to have a handle on how much technology you use and how much the support staff, the scientists, the physiologists, the biomechanic, the nutritionists, how much of a say they have, so it doesn't actually get in the way of performance because everybody's having too much of a say, or we're trying to do so many things that we lose sight of the basics. So the idea of always going back to the simple, from the complex to the simple. I think we called it simplexity. Is how do we bring that complex picture into something simple that is manageable and that gives us the maximum return on investment, with the means at our disposal, but without trying to do more than we should, really.
I love that term, simplexity. As you're speaking, this reminds me of what's turning out to be quite a big debate at the moment in the coaching landscape, and perhaps less so at the very elite level. But I still think this debate filters up into the very elite level. This notion of what coaching is, and does great coaching involve a lot of domain-specific expertise? Or can one be an outstanding coach without an overwhelm of expertise? Because actually coaching is about guiding and facilitating and helping the athlete themselves to come up with the right decisions for themselves. And as you're speaking, certainly at least within the context that we're talking about, and perhaps it becomes more nuanced as you go down levels, actually how important domain-specific expertise is, a knowledge of your sport is, a knowledge of coaching within your sport is, a knowledge of your sporting landscape. Because when you've got that knowledge, you can help your athlete have greater certainty. You can give them comfort because you can have that vision. You can work things out for them, and you can steer them on that journey perhaps just a little bit better than if you don't have as much domain-specific expertise. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I think one of the coaches really hit the nail on the head for me on this, really, because one of the questions that we asked them at some point was, so what do you think are the biggest challenges that high-performance coaches are going to face in the future? Okay, and this guy said, well, for me, one of the biggest is how do we manage the growing high-performance team, okay, and the growing invasion of technology, if you want. So how do we make sure that, because the risk on a few years ago, everybody talked about the marginal gains and British cycling and how many different research projects they had going at the same time to get that 1% and all that, and that's all great. But this coach said, I love that, but let's not forget the basics of, let's not really. We can see the wood for the trees sometimes, that we are looking for all these latest gadget, the cutting edge, and we take our eye off the ball of the most important things, which is the sport and people, and really that's something that I took to heart, actually, because in the sense of at the end of the day, it's still the same game or the same sport, and then you just have to make sure that you're not losing while looking for all the cutting edge that you can get an advantage. Is it worth it? Because you might gain that 1% here, but if you're not looking after the other 99% properly, it's another fine line, another fine balance. But
and also, in my opinion, Sergio, I mean, you did personality tests on this, and for me, personality science, whether one can say clearly states this or not, I'm not too sure. But if you take the personality trait of openness, there are people who are less open than others, who are less able to expose themselves to, say, a series of 1%, or are less inclined to doing that. So I suppose that comes back to potentially knowing your athlete as well. Marginal gains just doesn't work for some people because they're just not inclined that way.
But also, to me, you mentioned the openness, really, and for me, interestingly, these guys have a combination of in the test, okay, and the test was done by the coach and also the athletes, okay. So the athletes gave us their view on how open the coach was, okay. The coaches came up as quite open, all right, but at the same time, they are quite decisive, and so they're open to listen to anybody, and they actively seek out as much information as they can, but at the same time they have no problem telling you to shut up.
Well, that would be agreeableness, wouldn't it? Low agreeableness.
Exactly. So at that point they look at all the options, but they have no problem saying that's all very good, but we're doing it this way. And I've listened to all of you, but please excuse me. I mean, they try to reach decisions by consensus, but decisions are not made by committee. They really understand that they pay them the big bucks to make decisions and to own those decisions really, and that the book stops with them. And I think that's key, because I don't think that every coach has the strength to do that, to say to the doctor or the physiologist, no, we're not doing that. And that's becoming more and more important. And the stories we hear that the sports scientists, as much as we love them, sometimes are getting too powerful. I think that's what's coming from the coaches that we talk to, and that the balance needs to be redressed. And I know I'm gonna gain loads of enemies by saying this, right? But that's what coaches seem to be telling us, that there has to be a good balance there.
And playing on that, and I'm mindful of your time, and I want to get on to the benevolence piece, but just playing on that, I wonder if the IQ piece will start to come in, and look, when I say IQ, the intelligence piece, because you've then got to have coaches who are pretty intellectually nimble to be able to push back at the sports scientists, the medical doctor who's the head of medical, to be able to intellectually compartmentalize these important fundamentals from what is perhaps not important. Or if the sports scientist or the sports psychologist comes along and says, hey coach, I think you need to be considering this, it takes an intellectual nimbleness, a great deal of processing and cognitive capacity to be able to work out what is and what isn't important. So we've talked about conscientiousness, and my understanding, and it's just a vague understanding, is that in, say, success in the workplace, conscientiousness is second to IQ in terms of variance of success in the workplace. You just wonder if it's not just domain-specific knowledge that's going to be really important. It's also intelligence. It's also cognitive capacity, essentially.
Yeah, but that's something that when you look at these guys' history and how they've become who they are very intelligent.
Yeah.
I mean, at two levels, and I say they are highly educated, but at two levels. So out of the 17, 12 of them had sports-related degrees and postgraduate education. I think out of the 17, 12 sports-related degrees, another 3 had other degrees, really, and they explicitly said, my degree and my education was a foundation to be able to coach. Whether that was a sports-related or non-related, the ability to process information, like you say, was important to them. But not only that, they were, we talk on the research all the time about this insatiable thirst for knowledge. These guys are incredible. They're constantly reading, so they're trying to know as much as they can. So then when they're having these conversations with the psychologists, the physiologists, they can actually have conversations at a certain level.
Yeah.
So they can understand what's being said to them, but also be able to refute it if they need to. They are really knowledge hungry. We really found them to be guys that want to know a lot and will go out of their way, to read that book or to listen to that webinar or whatever. They do that.
Look, let's finish on the benevolence piece. Yep. And we have spoken a bit about this already, but it struck me from your findings that cognitive flexibility and emotional flexibility are quite important when it comes to being benevolent, because obviously they're driven, but they've also got to be benevolent. They've got to be compassionate. They've got to express empathy. So having that flexibility is important, right?
It's huge, really. Again, it goes back to this idea of a strong humanistic philosophy in terms of respecting the individual and seeing people as people first, as opposed to an athlete. Being able to put yourself in their shoes. I think in that sense, a lot of them talked about, because I've been an athlete, I can understand athletes and what they go through. Because sometimes that's been said as a negative thing, like I was an athlete and you have to do it the way I did it, and if you're not doing it the way I did it, then you're doing it wrong, or why can't you work as hard as I did? Okay, but these guys seem to not have that problem, where they really use that experience as a platform to understand the athlete, or try to understand the athlete. Um, Again, in terms of the benevolence, it's very important that I think benevolence had a real good impact on resilience. So as opposed to the resilience being anchored by being driven and your desire to win, actually the benevolence to yourself and being kind to yourself and your athletes was what made them really resilient. Like really being able to put things in perspective, to play down a bad loss, to even if the loss is really hurt, because they're, like I said, pathologically they want to win, and they might be hurting for 24 hours, they bounce back really quickly, and they have an action plan straight away to get out of that negative loop. And one of them, emotional stability seems to be massive in the sense of being able to become a serial winner, because again, going back to this idea of you have to be in the game for long enough, you need to stay there, right? And one of the coaches said, well, I've become really good at maintaining a pretty flat tone. So when we win, I don't go over the top. When we lose, I don't go down too much. I try to stay here as much as possible with little, peaks and troughs, but not trying to, not trying to break the bank every time. And I think that's important. And you mentioned the cognitive and emotional flexibility. To me, that's what it is really. The adaptability to. I mean, it's not just high performance. Imagine, I mean, the situation that we are now in with COVID, everybody's having to make the most of cognitive and emotional flexibility because the situation is changing every day. We've been thrown into a completely different environment than we were 6 months ago, and being able to look at things from different perspectives, to be able to just duck down and let the storm go over you, and just wait for the following day to arrive. Change your behaviors, the idea of the chameleon. What do I need to be for this person? What color do I need to be for this guy? What color do I need to be in this situation? What color do I need to be today for myself? Today maybe I just need to be the lazy guy that is going to take a day off. Okay. I think that's really important.
As you're speaking there, I'm thinking of that trait of agreeableness, and I think if you split that into two, when you split agreeableness into two, it's compassion and it's politeness. And it strikes me that these coaches might not necessarily be particularly polite. They're going to be straightforward. They're going to speak straightforwardly. That's their drive. And I would imagine they demand behaviours with relation to that. We've got to get on with this, but the compassion is there. The politeness might not be there as much, but the compassion is there. Seeing the world through the player's eyes, the person's eyes, the challenges that person has. And the other strand to that, again, comes back to that conscientiousness, which is when we have failure, which will be inevitable along this path, we have strategies in place. We're conscientious enough to have the strategies in place to be able to retain emotional stability, and to be able to reboot, restart, go again next day, next week.
Yeah, and I mean, you've touched on a number of things there, really, but the idea of building strong relationships really is fundamental. I mean, we say it all the time outside sports, right, that people get out of bad situations because of their relationships. They lean on their family or their friends. Someone looked after me when I was down. That can happen in sport as well. And the relationships we're able to build with our athletes work both ways. That sometimes the athletes are going to pull you through a difficult moment, but also sometimes you're going to do the same for the athletes, really. And it's, again, so a lot of the times in the past, I think we've talked about coaches not wanting to get too close to the athletes because one day you're going to have to fire them, and I think the counter to that is yes, we understand that, and there's an honesty, as at the bottom of the relationship, there's an honesty that everybody knows that at some point I'm going to have to let you go, but for the 2, 4, 6, 10 years that we're going to work together, I'm going to be in there with you. And again, the athletes talk about the coaches in that sense, really, where they feel that over time that it became a a relationship, not always an equal relationship, okay, but a partnership, where they really felt that the coach had their back, um, and I- and I think that's central really. Once if we can get people to trust us, we've gone a long way, because that's a massive thing. When people are not going to really give you their best when they're looking over their shoulder all the time, and that seems something that these guys managed to do quite well.
To finish, you started this project in your own mind, thinking that you might find coaches somewhere between Dracula and the Wicked Witch of the West, but it turned out you either found Indiana Joneses or Gandhis. Right.
Yeah.
Explain that to me, Sergio. Who's an Indiana Jones and who's a Gandhi?
Okay, so an Indiana Jones is a guy. I'm always mindful of the younger generations that may have not seen the Indiana Jones
Everyone's
movie.
seen it.
But always you could say in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies now, the Star-Lord is the Indiana Jones, okay, for the younger guy. But really someone that an Indiana Jones type of coach is a coach that is pretty ego driven. They really want to win for themselves. They have they have something to prove, but at the same time, they're generally on the side of the good. They're doing it for the right reasons as well, but they're making amends in a way. And then on the other side, you have some coaches that were more like Gandhi, completely for the greater good. Really, it's all about the athlete or the nation. Some of them had a real sense of I'm doing this for my country, but being Gandhi doesn't mean that you're soft. Being Gandhi, you can have steely determination to make things happen. Gandhi was very determined. He wasn't soft. Okay, he went about it in a soft manner, but he wasn't soft. But then the real discovery was that, as well as Indiana and Gandhi, regardless of which camp you were in, they all had some commonality in the middle, which we called the Homer Simpson. Okay, because all of them had that counterpoint of, okay, I need to look after myself. I need to take perspective. I need to understand what my donuts and my beer is. was the equivalent of that for me, so I can survive. That we call that the realist, the grounded realist, because you need that counterpoint to be able to survive in a world that is so pressurized, really. And we always say, when I'm working with coaches, say, find your Homer. You need to find your Homer. I don't care whether you're Gandhi or Indiana Jones, but you have to make an effort to find your Homer, because Homer, funny enough, is the guy that's going to allow you to survive in all of this. Okay, Gandhi and Indiana Jones will make you successful, but Homer will make you long lasting if you want.
I agree. So we've got to find our donuts and our beer.
Completely.
Sergio, thank you so much. That was really, really fascinating. I'm super excited for when your book comes out next year, and we'll get you back on. Until that time, I know that you will have tapped the interest of many listeners. How can people find you? Are you on social media? How can they follow you and your work, if you want to be followed, that is?
Yeah, so we are on Twitter at Dr Sergio Lara EU, so you'll find us there. It used to be Sergio Lara UK, but I changed that to EU in protest.
Okay, fair enough.
And yeah, by all means, Twitter's probably the best way to contact us initially.
Fantastic. Sergio, that was awesome. That was a brilliant hour. Thank you so much for your time, mate.
No, thank you for having me, Dan. Thank you so much.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.